Hi, everybody. I am Karen Hartglass, and you are listening to It's All About Food. Do you know that since 2009, It's All About Food has been bringing you the best and up-to-date news regarding food and our food system? The program includes in-depth interviews with medical doctors, nutritionists, dietitians, cookbook authors, athletes, environmentalists, animals, and health activists, farmers, food manufacturers, lawyers, food scientists, and more. Learn how we can help to solve many of the world's problems today and do it deliciously right here on It's All About Food. Now, as of this year, It's All About Food is sponsored by Health IQ, an insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, vegans, and vegetarians get lower rates on their life insurance. It's like saving money on your car insurance for being a good driver. Health IQ saves you money for living a health-conscious lifestyle on your life insurance. So support this show. See if you qualify. Go to healthiq.com/IAAF. Do you know what IAAF stands for? It's all about food. So go to healthiq.com/IAAF. And let's talk about apps for a minute. I just found out that Progressive Radio Network now has an app, thanks to Audio Now. All you have to do is go to the App Store on your cell phone, search for the Progressive Radio Network, and get the app. And you can listen to this show and other PRN shows and listen to past archive shows. I did it, and you can do it too. You know, when I was learning about this app, I was just curious to find out where you can listen to It's All About Food. And I found a bunch of other places. It's All About Food is on veganfeed.com, stitcher.com, podchaser.com, learnoutloud.com. And you could also find it at responsibleeatingandliving.com, my nonprofit, where you can also get the transcripts. So lots of choices. Whoa, that was a charge. And that's telling me it's time to bring on my guest today, Paul Shapiro. Paul is the author of Clean Meat, How Growing Meat with Animals Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner and the World. And we'll be talking about that today. Paul is a TEDx speaker and the founder of Compassion Over Killing for 13 years. He also served as a spokesperson and vice president for the Humane Society of the United States. Hi, Paul. Are you with me?
Karen, how are you doing?
Good. The last time I saw you, you were shaking hands with NYC Mayor Bill de Blasio.
You make it sound far more important than it was. I spoke to him for probably less than 1 minute total, but it was an honor to speak to him. He's been doing really good things for animals in many ways.
Absolutely. And I was able to get it on digital, I want to say film, but it's not film anymore.
That's very cool. Actually, that's a perfect segue to the topic of our conversation, since just as the film industry went from gelatin film to digital film, the meat industry may be going from whole live animals to clean meat grown from animal cells rather than from animal slaughter.
I know. It just came out of my mouth. I thought the same thing, and you said it. So there we go. Perfect segue. That's what life is all about, disrupting whatever we're comfortable with and making it better. But it's not always better for everyone, unfortunately, but that's what change is all about. All right, so let's jump in and talk about clean meat. I don't often talk about the benefits of meat on this show, but maybe we'll find some when we talk about clean meat. Now, yes, I've been a vegan. This year, I'm celebrating my 30th anniversary, Paul, of being vegan.
Wow. Karen, happy 30th vegan anniversary.
I know. I have to remember the exact date, which I'm going to dig. I think it was later in the summer, but it's going to be a big celebration. But you know what? For a long time, I've wanted factory farming to end. Is clean meat a part of this meat pie of ending factory farming?
Well, let's take a look at your own trajectory, Karen. And of course, this is independent of you, but in the 30 years since you became vegan, per year, huge numbers of of animals have been raised and slaughtered on factory farms and in slaughter plants. So my guess is that when you became vegan, there were probably around 6 billion land animals raised and killed for food every year in the United States alone. Today, that's closer to 9 billion. So the trends have been in the opposite direction, the wrong direction. More animals being raised for food and in seemingly worse and worse conditions for the most part. There might be some exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, you still have billions and billions of animals leading lives of deprivation and suffering inside of factory farms and slaughter plants. And so the question is really this. Right now, people eat more meat today than they did yesterday. Meat per capita meat consumption in the U.S. is going up, and around the world it's going up. China, India, Brazil, Mexico, meat consumption is on the rise in the fastest growing countries in the world. And so what can we do to help address this problem from a sustainability perspective, from an animal protection perspective, from a food safety perspective? And is there a way that we can essentially have our meat and eat it too? And that's the promise of clean meat. Clean meat is real meat. It's not an alternative to meat. It's real meat that instead of coming from animal slaughter, comes from animal cells. Basically, imagine taking a tiny sesame seed-sized biopsy from an animal's muscle. And in that little tiny biopsy, there are millions of what are called satellite cells. These are the cells that their only career path in life is to become muscle. Well, you put those cells in a fermenter or in a cultivator and make them think that they're inside of the animal's body, and they do what those cells do best. They grow into muscle. And it's the same muscle. It's the same exact muscle that would grow inside of the animal's body. It's just grown far more efficiently with far fewer resources, far fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and of course, with far less cruelty. Now, this is not science fiction. Indeed, it is now science fact. There are a number of companies, some of them backed by the meat industry itself, that are growing these kinds of clean meats. And I have eaten them myself. I've been a vegan since 1993, so a few years after you became vegan, Karen, and I don't have any ethical problem with these meats. I think that they are, they're essentially animal-free meats that are actual animals, but actual animal meat, but grown without animals. So that's the promise of clean meat. And there may be a lot of vegans who say they don't want it because it's actual animal meat, but vegans like you and I, Karen, are not the target audience anyway. It's targeted for meat eaters. So that's the promise of it, and that's what this book, Clean Meat, is all about. And people can go to the website, cleanmeat.com, to learn more about how they can get it.
So this is like not that important, but a hair-splitting kind of detail. You mentioned being vegan, and I've read different things about whether clean meat is vegan or not. It's from animal cells, but if you look at the definition of being vegan, since ultimately there would be no exploitation, I imagine, or maybe there would be, maybe this is kind of a veganish product.
It just depends on why somebody is vegan. If somebody is vegan because they're concerned about the animal cruelty, this does seem to address that concern. However, if somebody is vegan for other reasons, let's say there's some personal identity issue or health or something else, then they might still want to avoid eating actual meat. Personally, I'm not that concerned about the label or whether it's vegan or not. I think it is clearly animal meat, and so it's hard for that to comport with a definition of vegan that most people are familiar with. But again, it doesn't, frankly, really matter if vegans eat it or not. The goal is not to have an alternative to Beyond Meat and Tofurkey. We want those companies to thrive and do well. That's the food that vegans are eating now. We want this to be to displace factory farmed meats, like those coming from the biggest agribusinesses. And so the key is for meat eaters to eat this, not for vegans to eat it.
These cultured cells from animals, we just started hearing about it not too long ago. It seems like there's been some great momentum and progress going on. And I'm wondering, what's the motivation behind it? Is it capitalism or is it ethics? The people that are investing and supporting clean meat, why are they doing that?
Well, nearly every person who has started a clean meat company is doing it because they want to solve this pressing sustainability problem of the world demanding so much resource-intensive meat. And so you look at these people, most of them are folks who have come out of the environmental or the animal protection communities, and they recognized that it's going to be a long time before people voluntarily start eating less or no meat. The trends are going in the opposite direction. Every year, people are eating more and more meat, not less. And so these folks have come at this and wondered, what's the best way to solve this problem? We know that raising animals for meat is hugely resource intensive, contributes massively to climate change, contributes huge amounts of animal cruelty, and so on. One possible solution is for people simply to eat less or no meat. That's great. Not enough people are doing it, but that's one solution. Another is for people to switch from animal meats to plant-based meats, which are fantastic. These, again, are companies like Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods or Field Roast and Tofurkey and so on. Those are wonderful, yet they still represent less than 1% of all meat that is sold in the United States, with more than 99% of meat coming from animals. So for people who profess that they are wedded to actual animal meat, clean meat may be a solution for them to continue with that habit, but do far less harm in the process. Now, clean meat's not yet on the market, but that's a difference of years, not decades away. We do have plant-based meats on the market, and they're getting better and better all the time. In fact, I just recently had a Beyond Burger, which is now available even at TGI Fridays. They're phenomenal. It's so good. So my hope is that they'll explode in popularity in the same way that plant-based milks have exploded in popularity in recent years. But even if they do, factory farming is so problematic. It causes so much hardship to the planet and to animals that you don't want just one alternative. It's kind of like fossil fuels. The problem with fossil fuels is so bad that you don't want just one alternative. You don't want just wind. You want solar, you want geothermal, you want wind, and so on. Well, the problem with factory farming is so severe that, yes, you want whole foods plant-based diets as an alternative. You want plant-based meats as an alternative. And yes, you want clean meats as an alternative as well, because the problem is just too urgent not to have multiple solutions.
So in the lab, you're getting these cultured cells and they're growing muscle, correct?
That's right.
So what about the fat? Because people like the gristle and the fat that's in their meat too.
Yes, so you can grow those fat molecules, or you can add in plant-based fat molecules if you prefer. But meat is much more than just muscle. And so some scientists, like, for example, Dr. Mark Post, who unveiled the world's first clean hamburger in 2013, produced a patty that was just muscle. And so it was very protein rich, but it wasn't exactly like a hamburger because it didn't have fat or connective tissue and so on. That's what they're working on perfecting now. But they're making real progress. And yes, you can add fat to these foods to make them more like the meat that people eat today.
So I'm thinking about the way the FDA talks about genetically modified foods, and they talk from each side of their mouth. One side of their mouth, they say genetically modified foods are going to save the world. They're going to feed everybody. They yield better and they do wonderful things and they're just incredible. And then the other side of their mouth, they say they're exactly the same as all the other food we've ever grown. And I asked myself, how can something be the same and not the same at the same time? And I feel that way about clean meat too. I'm not against it. What's the same?
Yeah. Sure. Well, there's two things to think about with regard to this. So the first is the fact that these clean meat companies are not necessarily using genetic modification. So the companies that are making actual clean meat don't need genetic modification. They don't.
I was just using that as an analogy, saying that something's the same when it isn't the same. Yeah.
Totally hear you. So here's the question. Imagine that 150 years ago, you had a huge ice industry where huge blocks of ice were being cut out of lakes, right, or northern latitude lakes that had frozen ice. And there's this huge ice industry that gets built up, and they're transporting ice all around the world to warmer climates where people don't have ice. Well, enter the advent of industrial refrigeration, and all of a sudden you have a way to much more efficiently produce ice simply by cooling the water right in front of you down. Now, the ice that they were producing through refrigeration was considered unnatural because it wasn't naturally formed in nature. And in fact, the natural ice industry, which was a huge industry at that time, railed against what it called artificial ice, saying it was unnatural, it might be unsafe, you didn't know what was in it. But we all know that ice produced through refrigeration is the same product. It is ice. There's no difference at all, except that maybe it's safer because naturally formed ice might have pollutants in it, whereas ice that we are producing ourselves is, presumably coming from filtered or boiled water. So the same is so with clean meat. The end product is the same. It is just meat. But instead of being produced in nature, mainly inside of an animal's body, it is produced by technological innovation, in this case, through cell culturing technologies. So again, there's no difference between the ice, except that it might be safer to eat the so-called artificial ice.
I want to bring back the natural ice. Let's have a natural ice movement. Just drink ice from frozen water naturally. That's good.
Yes, and so, we should be careful of what we wish for in this case, because not only was this during the Industrial Revolution, and so there was pollution in the water from that, but also the way they got the ice out of the lakes was the only power source they had back then, horses. And what are horses?
Okay, we can go on all kinds of tangents here, but because there's always positive things and negative things. So refrigeration is great, and being able to freeze water is great. But, we also see tremendous havoc on the environment as a result. We lost the ozone, and then we brought it back, and now we have these hydrofluorocarbons, and the refrigeration fluids are really nasty. But that's another show.
Yeah, so there's very rarely a technological innovation that doesn't have some downside. Look at Facebook as one example. Huge downsides, yet it also makes a lot of people love it because it allows us to communicate with one another in ways that we couldn't before. So the same is so, though, for other things. I think about, we were talking about digital film versus gelatin film. I remember when 1 hour photo came out, and I was so amazed that you could get your photos in just 1 hour just by going to the local pharmacy. Now, imagine 1 minute photo. You'd throw your phone in the trash can if it took a minute to get a photo. You would never stand for it at all. Even if it was a 1 second delay, you might have a real problem with it. And so we come to rely on these new technologies that we think of as we just deserve them, but they're pretty recent in our lives. The same may be so with clean meat. It may be that in the future, people will look back on meat that came from animals who had to be tormented and slaughtered as really a relic of a technologically primitive past. And they'll say, I can't believe that that's how they used to do it. And they'll say, oh, wow, we're so thankful that we've had these technological innovations that allow us to produce meat without all of these harmful side effects that meat production of the past entailed.
So tell me, what does clean meat eat?
What is it?
What does it eat?
Oh, what
do those culture cells eat to grow?
Good question.
Clean meat eat.
So yes, that's a great question, Karen. So the cells have to eat. In the body, your cells, your muscle cells are eating. They're eating sugar, they're eating peptides, they're eating proteins, and so on. They have to eat. And the cells, when they're in a cultivator or a fermenter, they have to eat as well. And so they're eating the same types of nutrients that you would feed to an animal, except you just need fewer of them because you're not producing the hooves and the horns and the tail and the skeleton and the intestines and all the things that, we don't care that much about producing. And so you need far fewer resources. In fact, one life cycle analysis put out by a researcher at Oxford University found that compared to conventionally produced beef, clean beef would require 99% less land, more than 90% less water, and more than 90% fewer greenhouse gas emissions. So you still have to feed them something. It's just far less. So you're still feeding them these nutrients. And we've been culturing cells for 130 years in the medical field. And now those applications are being applied to food rather than to medical. And the key is to bring the cost down. Because when you're culturing cells for medical purposes, people are willing to pay a lot for medicine. People aren't willing to pay a lot for food. So you need to find feeds that will be much less expensive than what scientists are accustomed to feeding cells in cell culture now.
All right. And then here on Responsible Eating, at my nonprofit, Responsible Eating and Living, and also on the show, It's All About Food, we talk about the trifecta: health, environment, and cruelty to animals. So health is important. Is clean meat good for us?
Well, clean meat will presumably have the same nutritional the same nutrition as conventionally produced meat. What it would be different would be on the food safety angle. So the reason it's called clean meat, of course, it's a nod to clean energy because it's so much cleaner for the planet, but it's also just literally cleaner. Think about it. Right now, we are warned to treat raw meat in our kitchens almost like toxic waste because it is riddled with feces. Think about it. I mean, E. coli, Salmonella, Campylobacter, these are intestinal pathogens that can sicken us if we don't cook the crap out of our meat, literally. We literally have to cook the crap out of our meat to make it safe for us to eat. But when you're growing clean meat, you don't have all of those intestinal pathogens because you aren't growing intestines at all. You're just growing the muscle. It's a much more sterile environment. This is one reason why food safety experts are so enthusiastic about clean meat. In fact, Dr. Michael Greger of nutritionfacts.org, the renowned vegan doctor who, if you haven't read his book, How Not to Die, I highly recommend. It's a stellar book. He talks extensively about the benefits from a food safety perspective of growing clean meat as opposed to conventionally produced meat. But when it comes to the other aspects of the nutrition of it, you can tinker with it to give it different qualities. So instead of so much saturated fat, as an example, maybe you add omega-3 fatty acids. So you could theoretically have a hamburger that instead of causing heart attacks prevents them. But right now what these companies are trying to do is just to create meat that is the same as regular meat today, except safer and obviously better for the planet and animals.
So while we're on the subject of waste, does clean meat have a waste product? Or does it have some waste associated with it?
Yes. So it depends on what you're doing. But yeah, so let me give you an example. We can shift, let's say, to clean milk as one example. So it's not just meat that can be produced by these companies. You can also have clean milk. And what do I mean by that? Well, think about yeast. Right now, if you have brewer's yeast and you feed those yeasts, you feed that yeast sugar, and it produces alcohol. If you have baker's yeast, you feed that baker's yeast sugar, it produces CO2 to make bread rise. Well, we now have some yeasts that will, when fed sugar, produce casein or produce whey or other dairy proteins that are literally the same exact proteins that are found inside of a cow, except without any cow ever, not even any initial animal starter cells of any kind, just de novo being produced almost out of thin air, out of thin yeast, I guess. And so what happens, though, is the yeast produces these proteins. You then put that in a centrifuge so that you get rid of the yeast and you just have the proteins. Now you have whey protein and casein or whatever, and you add water and some minerals and some sugar to it, and you have what is identical to cow's milk that never involved a cow. But those yeasts would be a waste product of that process. So yes, it is not a waste-free process. It's hard to think of any food production that is, but it is a much more efficient and less wasteful way to produce milk than, for example, breeding a cow and raising this cow and feeding and watering this cow and medicating this cow and artificially inseminating her and then birthing the calf and then getting rid of the calf and then milking her and so on. So it's far less wasteful, but certainly you still have some.
And we wouldn't have those giant mountains of poop, those big lagoons that leak and smell and destroy communities.
Right. That's right. Yeah, you don't have intestines, so you're not going to have manure.
Okay. I'm thinking about the ick factor.
Mm-hmm.
And the ick factor to me is fascinating because you can basically market anything and convince people to consume anything. And we do that because, some people have an ick factor when you talk about tofu. I remember the first time I tried tofu and I had this I know I should eat this. I'm a new vegetarian. I don't even think I was vegan then. But there was something I don't know. And I love tofu. I mean, it's crazy. It's just a bean. And then when you talk about milk and people who love cow's milk, and then you say, well, how about dog's milk? And they get this ick factor thing. Why is cows okay and dog not? And clean meat, too, can have,
you're absolutely
an ick
right.
factor.
Sure, I totally agree with you, Karen. That's a big concern. I mean, there's three primary hurdles that clean meat
But why,
purveyors
why
face.
is animal flesh okay, but not flesh grown in a lab?
Right. Well, that let's just think about that. So right now, I mean, most people eat meat not because of how it is produced. Rather, they eat meat in spite of how it's produced. They don't want to know. And if you did have to think about it, though, I mean, right now, people are eating meat that comes, let's just take chicken as an example, since most of the animals we're raising for food are chickens. Nearly all the chickens who Americans eat were genetically selected to grow so big, so fast, that many of them had difficulty taking more than a few steps before they collapsed underneath their own bulk. They lived in their own feces in overcrowded warehouses where they never saw the sun. They never stepped foot on a blade of grass. And when it came time to take them to slaughter, most people don't want to hear about it. They don't want to know about it. So when you consider just how unnatural and unsustainable and inhumane our current methods of meat production are, all of a sudden clean meat starts to seem like the naturally preferable option. I also think that once we have localized clean meat production, so imagine just like your local neighborhood brewery might be brewing up an IPA, you might have your local neighborhood meat brewery, or maybe it would be called a meat carnery, where they're producing their own artisanal clean meats with their own local flavors that are good for that community. And all of a sudden you can see how the language that we use to describe these foods might impact how many people are interested in eating it. All of that said, there are consumer surveys that are done now. So, for example, one that was published just last year, which found that about 2/3 of American adults say that they would try clean meat, and 1/3 said that they would regularly eat it. Now, of course, we want 100% of people, or at least 100% of those who eat meat, to do that. But even if only 1/3 of people switch to eating it, that would, first of all, be a multi-billion-dollar industry. But second of all, it would spare billions of animals a year. And so you can see here, even shifts that don't require everybody to embrace it, but even a small portion of people, even a small minority of people to embrace it, could have really serious impacts for the good on our society.
When I was coming out of college, when I was going into college, I got a bachelor's and a master's in chemical engineering. And I worked in the semiconductor industry for 20 years. I love technology. And back then, I was kind of confused as to what area to go into. And I chose chemical engineering, but I also was thinking of biology. But we didn't have a biochemistry and biotechnology back then. There were a lot of things we didn't have back then. And I think today, what would I go into as a new student? Because there's just so many fields today that are groundbreaking and amazing. And this food technology, I'm wondering if that was something that I'd be interested in. And I want to mention that you talk about Marie Gibbons, the student in physiology, who's created like a clean meat turkey.
Yeah. It's Marie Gibbons is the first person ever to grow turkey nuggets, let alone to eat them, which she also did.
But here was somebody who was motivated to do good and cared about animals, and then ended up in a clean meat field.
So Marie was planning on becoming a veterinarian. She did not, this is somebody who really thought that her love for animals was going to take her into just working directly with them to help them when they're sick or injured. And as she was in veterinary school, there were a series of events that occurred that led her to realize that she could do a lot more good for animals rather than by helping individual animals at a time, hopefully working to spare millions or maybe even billions of animals from suffering through clean meat research. And so she first started going to North Carolina State University and now is at Harvard as a grad student working on clean meat research there. And she is a fellow with an organization called the Good Food Institute. which is a great nonprofit organization devoted toward advancing cellular agriculture of the kind that we're talking about. And so Marie is a real hero of the clean meat field, being the first person ever to grow and eat turkey nuggets. And the line of stem cells that she has created from this one turkey biopsy is now called the MG1 line, as in Marie Gibbons 1 line. So there's a line of turkey cells that she can send a vial of to any researcher in the country who can then grow their own nuggets from that line of cells.
So what are all the cell lines that are out there for different kinds of meats and meat products?
Well, any type of meat you could really do. So if you were to have a sample of any type of an animal, from a cow or a pig or a chicken or a fish to even a rhinoceros or an elephant or a tiger, if that was your thing, you could do. What's really interesting, though, is even extinct animals who we were able to get some DNA from.
Jurassic Park. Ah!
Yeah. So right now, if you are able to grab some collagen, which is a very prevalent molecule in the body, it's in your skin and your bones and so on. If you're able to grab some amount of collagen, you can get the genomic sequence of that animal. And we've done that with the mastodon. The mastodon was the huge elephant-like animal who populated North America for hundreds of thousands of years prior to humanity arriving here. And when humans showed up, they went extinct. And the theory is that humans hunted them to extinction about 10 or 11,000 years ago. But some of them have been frozen in tundra for the entire time that they went extinct until today. And scientists have been able to actually sequence the genome of the mastodon. And one startup called Geltor in the Bay Area in California has now taken that sequence and actually produced real mastodon gelatin like that you would find in the bones or the skin of an animal. And they made their own gummy candies with mastodon gelatin, and they ate them. And this is the first time anybody has had mastodon protein in thousands and thousands of years. And yet they did it. And so you see, you're not necessarily resurrecting the mastodon in full form, but at least some of their genomic sequence, it's done.
Wow, that is crazy. Well, I know that there's nothing to hold back the development of clean meat, and we'll see more and more and faster. I hope that we don't see really any detrimental side effects, but we won't know until it happens. We see with lots of industrial food, for example, that it's affecting our gut flora, our microbiome, and we've got a lot of allergies and sensitivities to wheat and other foods as a result. So that's a whole nother bag of worms, or something come up out of it.
The question is, we know about the damage that industrial animal agriculture is doing today. It is enormous problems for the planet. We're talking the biggest cause of land, water, and air pollution, a huge contributor to climate change, the biggest source of animal cruelty. So we don't know the questions that you're asking about because it just hasn't been long enough. But we do know the problem of going down our current path, which is enormous externalized consequences from animal agriculture as it's practiced today.
So what does it taste like? You've tried it. What have you tried?
I have now eaten, I'm not sure about this, but I suspect I've eaten a greater variety of clean animal products than any person on the planet. I now have had clean beef, duck, fish, liver, chorizo, even yogurt. And I liked them. They tasted good. I don't have a strong desire to eat these foods on a regular basis once they get commercialized because I just don't have a big desire to eat animal products. I'm quite happy to eat a plant-based diet. At the same time, I don't find anything unethical about eating them, and I hope that people who want animal products will switch to them. But they're good. They taste like meat because they are meat.
Right. And you didn't have any, it was probably small portions that you had, but you didn't have any problem digesting them after not consuming animal products for so long?
That's funny. Yeah, I've been vegan for 24 years, and I only started eating these foods while I was researching the book, so it's only been in the last couple of years. And in short, no, I felt fine, but you're right, Karen, it was small amounts. These foods are very expensive right now, and so even small amounts are still thousands of dollars. Not that I paid for them myself, but certainly the company that hosted me did, and they're not that eager to give away all of their bank accounts. So, yeah, I only had small portions of them. You're right.
Well, congratulations, Paul, on writing Clean Meat, How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner and the World. And I understand it's a bestseller now on Washington Post. Congratulations.
That's so kind of you, Karen. Yes, it is a Washington Post bestseller. I was very proud. Made number 8 for all nonfiction. One slot above Neil deGrasse Tyson's book, which admittedly has been on the bestseller list for 31 weeks straight, and mine was 1 week. But I was still very pleased by it. As a huge fan of Neil deGrasse Tyson's, who I love, I was very honored, and I certainly let him know that I was one slot above him, and he was very gracious and congratulated me. A very classy guy. However, thank you. I really appreciate that. And if folks want to help keep it there, they can go to cleanmeat.com and see where you can get it. It's available everywhere books are sold. And I really hope that if you get the book that you will enjoy it, rate it on Amazon or wherever you get it from, and let me know what you think. You can contact me via that website, cleanmeat.com.
Thank you, Paul Shapiro. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Take care.
Karen, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Woo, that was Paul Shapiro, author of Clean Meat, How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner and the World. What do you think about it? Like Paul said, you could let him know at his website. And let me know what you think of that and this show. You can always contact me at info@realmeals.org. info@realmeals.org. I don't know. Do you want to try it? Have you already tried the plant versions, the new ones that are out there, the Impossible Meat Burger and the Beyond Burger? Have you tried those? I have to say, I'm glad they're out there. But as a vegan for 30 years now, I don't know. They're kind of meh to me. I don't really need them. I love whole plant foods. I don't need them to be profoundly manipulated to have the textures and flavors that I desire. I like real food. Real, responsible eating and living. That's where I live. Real land. So last week, I think it was last week, I might have talked a little bit about the trends that are happening in the food world. And I wanted to continue because there's a lot of positive stuff that's going on. Have you seen Plant-Based News's end-of-year film, Vegan 2017? This is a great film. I think it's like 45 minutes. It's very inspirational. And it talks about all the great things that happened in 2017 that support eating a plant diet. And it's on YouTube, so you could just Google Plant-Based News Vegan 2017. I'm sure you can find it. If you can't find it, send me an email and I'll send you a link for it. How's that? But definitely, it's free and worth watching. And then I'm thinking about all the things that are in the news recently that give me hope. Give me hope that more people are concerned about being kind and being compassionate. And as Paul was giving statistics earlier, there are more and more people eating meat and killing and slaughtering animals every day. So on one hand, we see that this cruel situation is getting worse. And partially it's getting worse because we're sending out this message of our lifestyle here in the Western world to other countries whose economies are growing and they want to be more like us. I don't know why. And so they want to eat more meat because they compare eating meat to having made it, to have affluence, and they want that life. We need better marketing. I wanted to talk more about that earlier in the program because a lot of this has to do with investment in marketing, and when you have enough money to promote a product You can really get people to buy anything and to eat anything if you can have enough sexy images and celebrity people promoting a product. Many people will just believe it and go with it. That's human nature and marketing. But some of the good news, all over the world, good news kind of things. I was reading straitstimes.com. That's a website, straight, S-T-R-A-I-T-S, straitstime.com. Australian farmers facing threat from growing popularity of substitute meat and dairy products. Now, we've seen this happening in the United States, but I love to see that it's happening around the world. And Australian beef and dairy farmers are facing a growing threat from the emerging global taste for substitute meat and milk products, which are often derived from plants and nuts rather than animals. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Is it marketing? Is it that people are really becoming more concerned about the environment and realizing that the way we're raising animals for food today is horrific and wrong? I hope so. I hope that it's not just that we're bored and want to try something new. And that's where this emerging global taste for substitute meat and milk products is coming from. Now, I want to think that people are looking for things that are more compassionate. And people are choosing products, this article says, that involve chickpea patties and non-dairy milk made from soy, almond, and rice. And more restaurants and health food stores are starting to stock them, and people are buying them, and this is a good thing. There's a lot of good things happening in Australia, and it was very positive to read that little article. And there are people in Australia too, just like here in the United States, where there are fighting, the dairy producers are fighting for truth in labeling. There's a group that represents the dairy industry in Australia called Dairy Connect, and they have a campaign for truth in labeling, targeting non-dairy products made from soy, cashew, almond, oat, hemp, rice, and coconut extracts, and they want these products to be barred from using labels such as milk, cheese, yogurt, or cream. And, just like we were talking about before, these cultured cells from animals, they make meat. And these foods that we make from plants are milk and cheese and yogurt and cream. We can make these foods from plants. So these people who are trying to fight this and want, quote, truth, their truth is not the same as our truth. And it all comes down to what we're spending our dollars on. So as more people buy the non-dairy milk, cheese, yogurts, and creams, the concept of only labeling dairy milk as milk will just fade away. That's the power of money. But money often speaks about what we want. So the idea is to focus our philosophies a little bit more when we're making our purchases. More good news. Let's see. Oh, did you hear this one? In Switzerland. I couldn't believe this. It's good, but not as good as it could be. So the Swiss government has banned the culinary practice of throwing crustaceans, like lobsters and crabs, into boiling water while they are still conscious. Now, this is if you've ever seen it, and I know you have, it's just horrifying. And sometimes you can go into a restaurant and you see these poor animals in these tiny fish tanks. They're probably not even clean. They're probably gasping for whatever oxygen they can get. And then they're taken from that horrific environment and dumped into a boiling pot of water. And it takes a while before they die. And now in Switzerland, they're banning this process, which is just So encouraging. Like we're finally using our brains and thinking. So apparently from March of 2018, in 2 months, lobsters being prepared in Switzerland. Now here's the clincher. Lobsters being prepared in Switzerland will need to be knocked out before they're put to death or killed instantly. So we're still eating lobsters. They're still going to be slaughtered. They're still going to be murdered. They're just not going to be killed in boiling water while they're still conscious. So it's a step in the right direction, but it's not the ideal, in my mind, the ideal direction. I don't know why it takes so long for the veil to be lifted, for us to really realize what is good and what is cruel. But for now, in Switzerland, starting in March, lobsters won't be thrown into boiling water. And then, there are all these scientists that chime in and researchers and specialists that chime in, and they talk about whether animals feel pain or not, whether lobsters feel pain and crabs feel pain, and whether fish feel pain. And there's been a lot of evidence that they do. I don't know, when you do something that isn't natural to an animal and you see them flailing about, whether it's a fish that's flapping on the sand or in the boat after you've caught it, or a crab that's waving its claws, and you don't think that they are uncomfortable not being in their proper surroundings. What's the disconnect there? It's just obvious. They're suffering. And then there's another article that came out in the Smithsonian.com. Okay, I'm trying to bring you all kinds of mainstream, reputable places that are maybe seeing a little light. The article is called, "It's Official, Fish Feel Pain." The verdict is in, but will our oceanic friends ever get the same legal protections as land animals? What a question. Our land animals that are considered food animals don't even have great protections. So for fish, it's probably even worse. But it's an interesting article in the Smithsonian.com. It's official, fish feel pain. So we have more studies that are showing that fish feel pain. And unfortunately, if you read some of these studies, I don't even want to bring them up because to me, just the design of these experiments is so horrific to prove that fish feel pain. They basically do things to make them suffer. And then there was one, I said I wasn't going to mention it, right? But they'll do something to potentially cause pain, and then give them something like lidocaine, which is something often used in hospitals to numb an area so you don't feel pain. And then their response goes away. So it's like they do feel pain. It may not be like we feel. And how do we even know what pain feels other than to ourselves? I don't know what pain feels like to you. Some people can experience more or less pain, or some people have a higher tolerance to pain. Everybody's unique, and it's not just with humans. It's with all sentient beings, and sentient comes from the root, which means to feel. They're feeling. So I'm quite encouraged that we've got some mainstream publications that are talking about it. Yes, I'm reading. I don't want to share some of these studies that they're doing. They're just terrible. But if you want to read about it, you can in the Smithsonian article. You've heard me say this before from the film Finding Nemo. Fish are your friends, not food. Fish are your friends, not food. Okay, So that's what's kind of going on new in the world. And in the last little part of the program, I just want to talk about what's been going on in my world. So we are here, my partner Gary and I are here back in the Bay Area. We are directing the musical, The Music Man. I've mentioned this before with the company Playful People Productions. And one of the things that I like about them is part of their mission is to be kind. Just right up my alley. Be kind. And it's been kind of challenging eating because we're not at home with all of everything. My great inventory in my pantry and my collection of spices and all the things that I love to have to create every day. But, we've been doing a good job. And some places that I've been to this week, if you're ever in San Francisco, I went up to San Francisco a couple of times this week, and I went to a restaurant that I love, but I don't get to very often, and it's called Chaya. Do you know about the restaurant Chaya? I first went to, I think, the original version, which was in Berkeley. It was a tiny little hole in the wall. There were always people lined up outside because there was no room inside. There were just a few tables, but the food was amazing. And I need to find out more about this restaurant because the people that were doing the cooking were these older Japanese women. They were adorable. And the broths of the soups, it's traditional Japanese cooking before Western influence took over and they started adding tons of flesh to all of their dishes. And now there's one, it's been there a while in San Francisco. It's a much bigger restaurant. But those elderly Japanese women are still cooking and serving and making fantastic food. For example, I love miso soup and I make it at home, but I rarely eat it in a restaurant because in a Japanese restaurant, a traditional, maybe not traditional, but a conventional Japanese restaurant today, I don't even know if they make miso soup from scratch from a miso paste. They may actually just add water and make it from a mix because there are a lot of miso soup mixes. You just add water. And then they could add a little tofu and maybe some onions to it to freshen it up. But most of these miso soups have fish flakes in them, bonito flakes, a subtle little fish flavoring in the miso. And I just don't trust most restaurants when I ask them, is there fish in here? Because I don't even know if the servers know what's in the miso soup, especially if it comes from a mix. They don't see fish being added to the soup pot. It's just a powder. But at Chaya, they have miso soup, and they have many different versions of miso soup. The house miso soup, which is really very simple, and then, so many just delicious versions with wonderful mushrooms and seaweeds and tofu and vegetables, just gorgeous. They have a kanoko miso, which is a mushroom medley, which has the miso soup and some beautiful different kinds of mushrooms. Some I can't even pronounce, and green onions and tofu. Just so yummy. And I got a dish that's called the chayanabe, a vegan sukiyaki hot pot, and it's just stunning. Napa cabbage, spinach, red onion, carrots, mushrooms, kabocha, locusts, root, broccoli, cauliflower, zucchini, snap peas, snow peas, silver noodles, and tofu, and simmered in a soy-based broth. It's like a miso broth, and it's just gorgeous and yummy. And I'm getting so hungry remembering this place. And then the other thing I wanted to just briefly mention, we make tahini dressing all the time. Have you ever made it? Come on, let me know. Have you ever made tahini dressing? Yes. You've had it, maybe. Have you ever made it? Well, the other day, I make it like every day, okay? And I was in a rush, and I didn't make it properly. And so I thought I might share this because this might be helpful to some people. The trick when you're making tahini dressing is you take the sesame butter, which is thick like peanut butter. And some tahinis, when you buy them in the store, the sesame tahinis that you buy in the store, not the dressing, some have more oil in them, so they just pour. But the really good kind are just ground up sesames, and it's really dry and thick. You scoop that out, and you slowly add a little water, really slowly, to try and make a paste out of it. And then you add a little more to make it creamier, and a little more. It doesn't take long, but you have to add the water slowly. And then you could add vinegar or lemon juice and season it, and you have a lovely dressing. But what I did was I added the water too fast. And when you add too much water to the sesame butter, you never really blend it together. It's like broken. It never looks creamy. You can see little pieces in it almost. So if that ever happens to you, or if it happens to you often and you've kind of given up, that's the trick. You want to add the water very slowly as you mix it with your fork until you get a thinner paste, and then slowly a cream. That's my tip for you today. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of It's All About Food. Let me know what you think of the book by Paul Shapiro, Clean Meat, or even the concept of clean meat. And you can let me know at info@realmeals.org. I'm Karen Hartglass. Thanks for joining me on It's All About Food. Have a delicious week.
you